Hello and welcome to Three Things. This is the Tyee's informal interview chat show where I get the very big pleasure of chatting with all of the folks in the Tyee family about the three things that are on their mind in this moment. And my name is Emma Cooper. I'm the outreach manager here at the Tyee. And this is our 15th episode of this new thing that we tried, connecting with folks via live stream on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube. And we have the pleasure of chatting with Crawford Kilian today. But before we get into that really great what I hope to be a really great interview. This is going to be our final interview for now for this season, I guess we'll call it. And I just wanted to say thanks to some of the folks that made this happen. I've been at the Tyee for just under 2 years, and it's been really cool to just see how everyone works and pulls together to make new things happen. And so big thank you to our publisher, Jeanette Ageson, who thought of the idea, got it happening, and then is also just in the chats doing all of the dirty work as well. Big thanks to Christopher Chung, who is not only our first interview to get things going. If you notice, anytime we try something new, we will make Chris go first. He's brave that way. He also did the wonderful art that helps promote this series. And big thanks to Alamide, because he's always promoting us on social media. He had a great interview as well. We had help from Peter Carlone getting us set up as far as the tech. And then everyone on the Tyee team, thank you so much for folks who wrote up interviews and just promoted other people's smart things that they had to say. So this has truly been a Tyee team effort. And big thanks to everyone, all of you who have been watching, asking great questions. We already have a question coming in. So please, if you've got questions for Crawford coming up, do ask them early on any of the chats on whatever platform you're watching on so that we have our best shot of answering those questions. And thank you so much to all of the Tyee builders who also contribute every month or one time to just make new initiatives like this possible. The last folks I have to really thank are all of our editors, Robin Smith, our editor-in-chief, who had a great interview last week, David Beers and Paul Wilcox. Specifically, these are the folks who all of the information passes through them at some point, and they work incredibly hard behind the scenes to make things really high quality, to fact check things, and to just tighten things up so we can get the best possible information out to you. And we're doing a fundraising campaign right now. We're trying to add 600 new builders to the Tyee's roster of supporters who give every month to keep us going and to keep us being able to try new things like this. So this has been a real joy for me. I've looked at our stats, and between, on average, 800 or 900 of you have tuned in every week, enjoying it, enjoying these things that we've had to say and these conversations we've been having. So again, thank you so much for that. We're trying to add a new editor to our roster to expand so we can do more things like this, have more great journalism. So if you, I know it's a tough time for a lot of folks, but if it's something that this has been fun for you, consider becoming a Tyee builder and kicking in every month, as little as $3 a month. Or whatever works for you, really just helps us keep producing great journalism. So I'll stop the pitch now, but again, thank you so much to everyone who's made this happen. And again, we are live broadcasting from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. And now we're going to jump into the interview with Crawford. And I like to say Crawford's put up some big numbers. This is a man who has 40 years of experience teaching at Capilano College and University. This is a man who's published, I think, 21 books. We'll get into that a little bit, including his new republishing of his book, Go Do Some Great Thing, which is the story of BC's Black pioneers. And this is also a man who's written hundreds of articles for the Tyee. So I'm very excited to talk to Crawford, and please welcome him to our online stage. It's Crawford Kilian, everyone.
Well, hello.
Seamless.
How do you do?
Seamless entries. How you doing, Crawford?
I am doing exceedingly well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought it would be fun because you have published so many different books with so many different topics, everything from fantasy to how-to books.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to name a few of them, and then you're going to give me a one-sentence synopsis on them because I can't.
Okay, I'll try.
I can't read all the books you've written. There's too many. All right, here we go. The Chronoplane Wars: Empire of Time.
James Bond gets in the time machine.
Oh, so succinct. I love this. You're going to have to teach me how to be succinct after this. Brother Jonathan.
Kid with severe cerebral palsy becomes a superhero.
Great. School wars assault on BC's education.
A great deal of dirty laundry from the 1980s social credit era.
How did you make that it sound as fun as the sci-fi? Well done. Okay. The Last Vikings.
The last Viking is a kid who goes off to join the Inuit sometime
Amazing.
in the 14th century.
Amazing. Okay. Last one, Icequake.
Icequake. Go read The Guardian today, and it's all coming true. It's our Antarctic ice sheet comes off, and there is hell to pay.
Yes. So I think this really feeds a little nicely into the conversation that we're going to have, is that you have a knack, whether it's in your writing on the Tyee or in your science fiction, of thinking long-term, thinking ahead, and sort of semi-predicting things that are going to happen. So that's not the prediction we wanted to come true, but in this three things conversation, we're going to talk about your thoughts on a post-pandemic world, some of the politics of the pandemic, and then about your book on BC's Black Pioneers. Sounds good. So again, while most people are now starting to think about pandemics who were not necessarily spending a lot of time thinking about them, you have spent, and you already did spend a lot of time thinking about them, and now you've zoomed ahead into what happens next and after the pandemic. Could you give a little bit of your perspective, what the lay of the land will look like?
I think what's going to happen is that we will see, first of all, that what we now call essential workers really are essential. And it's one of the ironies of our society that the people who do the absolute essential work get paid the least possible amount. And this goes for everything from babysitters, who are, after all, looking after your little darlings, to teachers, to grocery clerks, and so forth. And I think we're going to have to give them much more recognition, higher incomes, and a lot more job security, because let's face it, we need them more than we need hedge fund managers.
That's very true. So that's almost sounds like an extension of how people felt in the sort of the peak adjustment period of the pandemic, where all of a sudden you're looking like a doorly at your grocery store bag, person.
And you look at the clerk and you think, I don't have the guts to do that job.
Yeah.
But that's just part of it. What we're also going to see, I think, is it's begun to sink in that the people who are least equal economically and politically and in society are also the ones who get sick earlier and in greater numbers. And they are suffering severely now, far more than most of the people who are working from home, like me. But that can't go on, because there's always going to be this reservoir of people who are too sick, too poor, too demoralized to get the essential work done. And that we're going to find, in fact, that we have fewer disease outbreaks in an egalitarian society than we have now. And we're seeing the same thing happen all over the world. It's the most unequal societies that are suffering the most. And it's the more egalitarian ones, like some of the ones in Europe, that are doing much better. Not every one, but as a general rule, this seems to be the case.
So you're talking about not only just appreciating people going, oh, we now value the work where we weren't even appreciating that before, but that being almost a selfish reason to do that as well, if you can't appreciate.
In effect, what we have,
So
I think we have to roll back the last 40 years of neoliberal economic entrenchment and try to pick up where we left off in the 1950s and 60s with a much stronger union movement, much more even distribution of income, certainly siphon off a whole lot of wealth from the top 1.1%. And I think we'll see much less traumatic results than we've gone through recently.
So those are some of the ideals of where we want to get to a more level
Yeah,
playing field for
yeah,
everyone. And that almost bleeds pretty directly into your next point about the politics of the pandemic,
yeah.
changing from a society where everyone is supposed to do it for themselves and bootstrap and American dream it
Hmm.
into something more egalitarian is a
Yeah,
huge cultural mental shift.
yeah.
What do you see playing out politically as far as that goes? What are the politics
Um,
of that?
I don't see much of a future in the US for the Republican Party in this case. And probably the same is true of the conservatives if they're really going to stick to good old ironclad small government, low taxes, etc. Because the taxes will be higher, government will be bigger. They'll have to be. And okay, we'll get used to it. Government got pretty big in the 1930s in the US, and the US did much better economically as a result than Canada did, where we had nothing like a New Deal.
So what are some of the things that you think need to have happen in order for people to turn the corner on that? Because we're seeing siloed echo
Yeah,
chambers of conversation. We're seeing
yeah,
some people say, oh, sounds really reasonable, I'd be into it. And
mhm,
some people are really digging in their heels, and none of
yeah,
those people seem to be talking to each other.
yeah. It is going to require, among other things, some really, really smart politicians who can make the case, something like the way Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, that people deserve this. This is not something that you have to earn in some way. This is simply what everyone should get as an entitlement of citizenship, whether it's in Canada, the U.S., Britain, wherever. And that will take probably some years of maneuvering, but I'm hoping that especially if we North Americans can stop regarding our own belly buttons and take a look at what's going on in the rest of the world, we'd see that countries like Finland and Germany and so forth are doing pretty well. And they're very relaxed. They're much happier countries than ours are. And they are by no means socialist nightmares. They're exceedingly capitalist, if anything, but they involve capitalists who are realists and who know that they're not going to get away with simply screwing the workers every chance they get. So that kind of growing up would do us a power of good, I think.
And do you think the pandemic has helped us grow up in this way? Again, is growing up, do you just have to wait, like actual growing up and have things happen to you? Or is there something that we need to be doing
Well,
now?
it was one of the things that was striking. Well, let me step back from that. In 1989, I can remember writing a column for the Vancouver Province uh, about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the shock that was. I mean, this is how we lived, the Soviet bloc and all that stuff. And I wrote, communism is only the first to fail. And it went down so fast that, you thought, wow, that was amazing. And now, essentially, the same thing has happened. It didn't require, people defecting from one country to another or anything. But almost as soon as the pandemic really got established, well, Trudeau rushes out, in effect, universal basic income. And it must have just been like coals of fire on his head to be doing that. But what was the choice? You couldn't let people starve in the street, which is what was going to happen. So when a big comes along, it's dramatic to see how rapidly people could change their policies.
So is your recommendation we just have a few more pandemics till we really get
No,
enlightened?
no,
Okay.
far from it. One of the worst things that could happen would be for people to get used to these pandemics. Let me give you an example. This pandemic has not yet, in 9 months, killed 1 million people. It's getting there. Won't be long, but it's not there yet. In about the same period, the Spanish flu in 1918-19 killed millions. And here was what was really amazing. Everything went on. The war, World War I was fought to an end. The Russian Revolution got going. There was a peace conference in Versailles, and all that stuff went on. And I think that may be one reason why so many people died, because the governments of the day largely ignored it. It was a municipal problem, you know. Vancouver could do it one way, and Calgary could do it another. And good luck with whoever survived. But this time, everyone realized this was the real thing. It was not, you couldn't just carry on business as usual. And so that's one reason why we have far fewer deaths in this one, because we are taking it more seriously than we took the Spanish flu in 1918.
And this kind of comes into some of the politics of care and self-care, almost into what is our limit as an individual person and as a society, and let's respect that rather than just pushing through that. I liked your point when we were talking about this. You just sort of said the idea that you can kind of climb up a ladder over other people has been part of capitalism. And now we're seeing if anyone gets sick and we're not letting everyone climb up the ladder, we're going to hurt. So we're starting to see people get into that. Now there's going to be different ideas about how to get out of that. And we've got a question from Tom Parsons, and he asks, has Crawford considered the very real possibility of increasing human intelligence to genius level as predicted and accomplished over a century ago by Dr. Boris Sidis? So what's the idea of people getting really smart and maybe even technology kind of extracting us from this mess?
High intelligence, in my experience, and I've known some very, very bright people, often goes along with incredible stupidity and extremely poor judgment. You can be smart enough to fall in love with a really brilliant idea and simply refuse to see what's wrong with it. In fact, Richard Feynman used to say, it was almost like an instruction to his students. As soon as you come up with an idea, your first job is to prove you're wrong. And you're crazy, and what were you thinking? But too many people just fall for it. I do not think that simply getting higher intelligence by whatever means would do anything necessarily to improve our chances as a society.
It may just mean more people to build the rocket ships to go to the moon while we avoid some of our responsibilities. So we've got another question from Sandra Curry, who's asking, neoliberalism has infected every institution and the politics of society. The left has been ineffective in combating rising fascism as a result. Where do you see effective resistance coming from?
I think it's going to be coming from the left. It's going to be coming from people we don't necessarily expect it to come from. The grocery clerks, and so forth, who are finally going to realize we don't need to put up with this nonsense. We don't need to worry about being evicted. We don't need to worry about losing our health care and so on. And at some point, they're just going to turn around and say, no, this isn't going to work. I am hoping that that in the US, the Democrats win, and B, the Biden-Harris administration will then start moving pretty briskly to replacing Obamacare and expanding it, and eventually getting to some kind of single-payer system against very tough odds. And I think something like that, for instance, could help start creating a more egalitarian society.
So I'm hearing you've got a real strong hope for how it plays out. Now we all had a lot of hopes.
I can't say, here's this new phenomenon coming up, who's going to be the Wayne Gretzky of Canadian politics, and he's just going to solve all our problems for us. That's not going to happen. But I think we're going to find, just as we were surprised by the events of February, March, that stuff will happen. And people will be coming out of unexpected corners and doing remarkable work.
That's very hopeful, and I think people are going to hang on to that hopeful projection.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm just going to quash it with a question about Trump. So we've got a question from Mary via Zoom. She said, what is your take on how the world reacts, Canada in particular, if Trump is reelected?
I think it would not be so much how we react as how other people react. I think we would see I think we would almost see the United States come apart. That some states which are strongly democratic would simply dig in their heels and say, we want to recount. Something went wrong here. And similarly, some of the pro-Trump states would refuse to accept a democratic election, a victory. So I think it's going to be a very rough ride in the US for the next year or two. Because one of Trump's greatest achievements was essentially to break American institutions that have stood intact for centuries. And where he couldn't break them, he shook a lot of popular confidence in them. You know, the Justice Department, the State Department, the FBI and the CIA. My God, I never thought I would be rooting for the FBI and the CIA. But there it is. You know, you start realizing that the strength of a democracy is in its institutions. If you don't have strong institutions to balance all the contending forces, then you might as well not bother.
And it sounds like the strength of those institutions is in the people who fight for progressive change within them.
Yep.
A question from Sheila, my mom, how's it going? She says, how do you think we attract these smart people to actually engage in politics? Do you think women can be, do you think women will be a must to see this sort of change happen in politics?
Women would certainly be a huge help. We've got a very generous supply of male egos in politics now. And I really like, for example, the look of the government in Finland, which is all young women. I mean, women under 35. Ministry of Education is getting a guy for a while because the Minister of Education is going to have a baby. So here, you know, and you find that it's to a large extent, the countries that are run by women are doing the best in this pandemic. You know, Germany, New Zealand, Finland, and so forth. And it's the guys who swing their egos around, like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, who are getting themselves and their people in the most trouble. So women will certainly be a huge factor in this. Yeah.
And moving on sort of to the last question or the last point in the three things, your book, Do Some Great Thing, which is about the Black pioneers of British Columbia, is getting republished for the first time since 1978. Is that correct?
Not quite.
Not the first time?
It was republished in 2008 as a kind of almost like an amateur effort, a labor of love, with a young Black poet as my publisher. And we put it together, and it's okay. I got a lot of new material into it, but it was as a book, as a resource, it was not as effective. And it sold almost no copies and vanished. So then when Douglas and McIntyre came to me and said, we think the book holds up, would you like to do a new edition? I said, certainly would. And it is beyond my fondest dreams to see the kind of editing it's getting. It's clearly, they're really investing a lot of work in it. And I'm just over the moon, as they say, about seeing it back in print. It'll be out in late November. And I'm hoping that the Ministry of Education picks it up and makes it part of certainly at least the secondary syllabus. But we'll see. In any case, it'll be back, and I'm delighted.
Well, and that's so exciting and obviously incredibly timely.
Mhm.
What, again, in 78, what was attracting you to those stories? You're originally from the United States,
Yeah,
you're writing about the Black
yeah,
pioneers in BC. Explain how you came to
yeah.
do that.
I stumbled across a mention of the Black pioneers in Margaret Ormsby's pretty standard history of BC. And I was amazed because I'd never heard of such a development. And I got into it. And the more I read, the more I realized there was a really real opportunity for a serious book on the subject. And of all things, and I knew almost nothing about it. I published a letter in the Vancouver Sun saying, I'm doing this book on the Black pioneers. If anyone knows anything about them, please get in touch with me. And the wife of Scott McIntyre, who was running Douglas and McIntyre then, saw this letter, passed it along to her husband. He wrote to me, and I sent him a sample chapter, and we were off to the races. But it was a different age, Emma, because it involved taking ferry trips over to Victoria and spending days and days in the archives and getting printouts from microfilms. And
No.
it was a long, slow process. And then, of course, you would be transcribing all this stuff onto your typewriter with a carbon
No.
copy and so forth. And oh man, it was a hassle. It was the computer has changed book writing so much you would not believe it.
As a millennial, I'm
Yeah,
triggered by every part of the technology in that story. I
yeah,
gotta say, you
yeah,
probably had to fax it to someone too.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, we didn't know we didn't. Faxes were too high tech for me.
Jeez.
This was
No,
1978. You know,
right.
Steve Jobs was about 12 years old.
It's good. That's good perspective for me. You're giving me all the perspective.
Uh-huh.
So what, like, again, what was the intersection of stories that was
Mhm.
really to sort of pull you through all the microfiche and the microfilm?
Yeah.
What was exciting and alive for you that kept you doing all that
Uh,
research?
it was the sheer number of good stories in the Black Pioneers. There were remarkable people, very bright, very enterprising. They had made it from the eastern US to California when, and some of them had actually bought themselves out of slavery. Others had were free themselves. They had to buy their families out of slavery, and a slave was a very expensive proposition in those days. So they were smart, courageous, and very enterprising. And when they realized that California was not going to be a very friendly place for them, they decided to head elsewhere, just as uh, Sir James Douglas in Victoria sent them an invitation to come up and settle in Vancouver Island. And Douglas wanted them because he needed non-Americans. And the Supreme Court in the States had just said no Black person, even if they're born in the US, even if they're born free, can ever be an American citizen. So here were hundreds of legally defined non-citizens who could balance the Americans who Douglas knew would be flooding into the colony to go look for gold. And he had seen what the Americans did when they moved into country that wasn't their own. They took it over. Texas, the Southwest, you know, they carved off 2/3 of Mexico. And Douglas could see them doing the same thing in Western Canada. So he needed somebody to give the British a counterbalance to the Americans. And it seemed to work actually pretty well. We're still here.
We're still here. And it would have been such
Yeah,
a
we
wild
Canadians.
time with so many different groups of people, literally very little
Yeah,
policing, and I can only
it
imagine.
was 1858 was a crazy time in Vancouver Island and on the mainland. There were thousands of people flooding in from all over the world, largely from California. There were fortunes being made and lost. my hero, Mifflin Gibbs, who was kind of the leader of the Black community, made a fortune just in buying land and building something on it and then selling it. He was, I guess you could say he was BC's first developer. And he did very well for himself. So,
well, and I'm hearing in those stories things to sort of circle back to more present times is people who have been sidelined and marginalized, not even getting full citizenship in the States, are really the people who are taking risks, who are trying new things, and who are ultimately the foundation of moving forward in a big way. So I'm hearing that tie into your assessment of a post-pandemic world where the folks at the grocery store are making moves and doing things, and we definitely need politics of care is the last thing that I've heard for you as well.
You know, they finally found, the Black pioneers finally found there was not much politics of care in British Columbia. They found that one way or another they were being shafted again. They just weren't, the Canadians just weren't quite as rude about it as the Americans. And in the meantime, the Americans had fought a civil war, and then Reconstruction came in, and things looked a lot better for Black folks after 1865. So a great many of them went back to the U.S. Mifflin Gibbs did. He ended up as the first elected Black judge in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then he became, in his 70s, a U.S. consul to Madagascar. You know, he had quite a career. And when he died in 1915, he was probably the richest Black person in the country. But the people who stayed tended to just sort of settle in. They got on with their lives, whether they were living in Salt Spring Island or Victoria or Barkerville, wherever. And there weren't enough of them to be a political threat to the whites. And in fact, the whites explicitly said, the Blacks are just like us, except for the color of their skin. It's the Chinese we have to worry about. So, boy. So in any case, a Black community persisted. It grew slowly for example, when the Black porters were on the railways, they began to settle around what is now called Hogan's Alley, which is about where the Georgia Viaduct is. And they were just there. And they weren't terribly rich, they weren't terribly influential, but they got on with their lives.
Well, we're all hoping to get on with our lives through this pandemic. And thank you so much for giving us a little bit of a look forward and a look back in terms of what we can learn from the perspectives that you've diligently researched on microfiche and beyond. So thank you so much for that. And the last question we had was someone was wondering if your book is available on ebook. Could you just tell us about that?
A lot of my old science fiction novels are available as ebooks, but Go Do Some Great Thing will be available as an ebook as well as in hard copy. Yeah.
There you have it. Well, thank you so much, Crawford, for taking the time and again for this wonderful chat. Thank you for everyone listening and watching and all your wonderful questions. And we're this is it for a while, but I'm sure we'll be back at some point with more 3 things. So bye-bye till then.
Bye-bye. It's been a delight.